Well, I'm Matt Stanford. I'm the CEO of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute, and welcome. We have 20-something people registered for tonight, but I think the Astros pulled a few of them away. So thank you for being here. And we're going to talk tonight about really kind of some of the problems in the mental health care system in general, and then some of the things that we're doing here at the Hope and Healing Center in an attempt to try to overcome some of those, really kind of looking new ways to conceptualize how mental health care might be delivered and how it might be accessed. And so I'll talk about some of those things as we go through. Most of the statistics that I'll talk about tonight are pretty disturbing because our mental health care system, what we call a system, really isn't very functional because it really was never set up to be functional. So to begin with, let me just kind of give you a story that we start out with a lot of times here that has initially, you may think nothing to do with what we do today in mental health care, but I think has a lot to do with the idea of, an impossible situation in which a community can come together and really make a difference. So Dymphna was a 7th century Irish princess. She was 14 years old, and her father was a pagan Irish king, and her mother had become a Christian and then became ill and died. And then her father went into a deep depression after her mother's death and was unable to really rule. So they thought perhaps if they were to find someone in Ireland for him to marry, he would come out of his depression. So they searched across Ireland, but they were unable to find anyone as beautiful as his mother or as her mother. But the king thought, well, Dymphna is as beautiful, so I will marry her. And so she thought that was a problem because she was a Christian herself, and she didn't think it was right for her to marry her own father. But her father insisted, so she and her priest and a few other supporters left Ireland for the European mainland, where they then settled in Geel, Belgium. Okay? And her father then began to send out troops to look for her. It took them about a year, but they finally found her. And then her father went to Belgium to bring her back and insisted that she come back and marry him. At which time she said no. He said, if you don't come back and marry me, I'll kill your priest. And she said, I'm not coming back. And so he chopped off the priest's head and then said, if you got to come back with me or I'm going to kill you. She said no, so he chopped off her head and then left their bodies there. And the people of Geel buried them in a cave nearby, and no one really thought much of it until the 13th century when some excavation uncovered the bodies, and suddenly it was said that a number of people in the area that had mental illness and epilepsy were healed, and so there was some thought that perhaps the body of Dymphna, the relics of Dymphna, had some miraculous power about them, and so they built a small shrine there associated with a Catholic church that was there, and people began to bring their mentally ill loved ones to Geel, Belgium. So imagine for a minute you are a farmer and it's 1260 AD and you live in Europe and you've got a schizophrenic son. What do you do with your schizophrenic son? There is no treatment. There's really no medicine, period. Everybody just thinks he's evil or something wrong with him, or he has a demon, or, you're an outcast, he's an outcast. Well, you put him in a cart and you take him to Geel, Belgium in the hopes that he'll be healed. And then if he isn't miraculously healed, you leave him there. And that's what most people started doing, is leaving their mentally ill loved ones there. And so hundreds of people were being left there, maybe even thousands at times. And so the church was overrun. They weren't really able to care for them effectively. So the people of the town began to take these individuals into their homes. Again, these are untreated mentally ill individuals. Take them into their homes and care for them. They refer to them as boarders. And that process has continued from the 13th century to right now in Geel, Belgium. Today, there are between 250 and 300 individuals that live in homes of local residents and are cared for by them. Now, today it's incorporated into the traditional psychiatric system that they have there, but that's continued on nonstop since the 13th century. Those individuals live their entire lives, if they want, with those families. Sometimes it's a short period of time, sometimes it's a lifetime. There are stories of children growing up and just thinking of the individual living with them as an uncle or a friend of the family. They work with the family. They work on farms. They are part of the community. But it's an incredible story of how what you would think of as an impossible situation with mental health was really overcome by a combination of faith and community. And, you might ask yourself, and that's a church of St. Dymphna in Geel, Belgium today. Her relics are there. And then there's a shrine to Dymphna here in the U.S. somewhere where some of her relics are also. But that church is not the original church, because the original church burned down in the 1500s, and then that church was built on top of it. So, but, you might ask yourself, how's that related to today? Well, the reality is, while we have a lot of good resources for the mentally ill, we don't do much of a better job, to tell you the truth. And we'll go through and we'll look at some of that. 1 out of every 5 Americans in a given year will meet criteria for mental illness. It's about 44 million individuals. A smaller number will have serious mental illness, but still a very significant number of individuals. And, about half of all chronic mental health conditions are in place by the age of 14. With 75% being in place by 24. So in that 14 to 24 year age onset period, that's where most illnesses are going to kind of come on. They can come on younger, some can, many can come on older, but that's that prime age of onset. And if you look at that in the context of, say, other illnesses, you see that mental illness, really, if you add these three together, you barely have more individuals that are affected than with just mental illness. And so what we often talk about, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, while those are certainly significant issues that we should be concerned with, together they are about what we're dealing with mental illness. Yet we never have conversations about mental illness like we have about heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. In fact, when you go home tonight, you'll probably see a commercial about heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. I mean, it's just commonplace. You virtually, the only commercial you ever see about mental illness is a commercial for the direct marketing of pharmaceuticals, trying to tell you that you should go ask your primary care physician for this or that or whatever. But you'll see, the American Heart Association or a discussion or something about diabetes prevention. You just don't see the same kind of conversation. So it's a significant problem. It's at epidemic levels. It's absolutely destroying our culture and our society. It affects our criminal justice system. If you look at our prison and jail population, 64% of jail inmates are struggling with a mental health problem, 56% of state prisons and 44% of federal prisons. I mean, this is overwhelming and really unconscionable if you think about it. I mean, 64% of jail inmates are struggling with a mental illness. And then, 44 states, there's more people in that state in a prison or a jail than there are in psychiatric facilities. And so it's, we really moved individuals when we deinstitutionalized. We moved them from asylums, which were not good places. I'm not saying that they were good places, but these large state hospitals that we think of as asylums, we moved them into jails and prisons. We moved them into homelessness. A large percentage of homeless have serious mental health problems. And this, what's interesting about this statistic right here is, 30% have serious mental illness. That's not including substance use. If you included substance use, it'd be well over half. But this is just schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, PTSD. These are serious mental health problems. And that's 5 times more than the general population. So, if you want to know where a lot of the mentally ill individuals are today, the last place you go and look is in hospital, because that's where you rarely will find them. If you look at a comparison in the early 60s, when deinstitutionalization had really just begun, and say, 2003, you can see the change in where people are living. So you can see a much larger number of homeless. You can see a much smaller number of mental hospitals, because basically we shut most of them down. And you can see a larger increase in prisons. And then this gray area here, what you find here in our century here, you find that 75% of those individuals are being cared for by a family member in that gray area right there. So they're really is no place for someone with mental illness to live if they need ongoing mental health treatment. There was in the deinstitutionalization days, the thought was that there really weren't people that needed to be treated in hospitals for a long period of time. There also was a thought in the early 60s that perhaps if enough social engineering was done in schools and with parents, that mental illness could be rid from our society, that there would be no more mental illness. But early 60s, mental illness was still not understood to be biological. There wasn't really it wasn't even a thought. I mean, in 1963, there were still individuals who would argue that schizophrenia was just a choice that people made because they wanted to have a break from reality to deal with the psychic stressors they were dealing with. And so, again, there's not a complete or even an understanding that we have today. Maybe I would never say we have a complete understanding now, but just a different understanding. And all of that was kind of wound up into the fact that we had these horrible institutions that weren't serving their purpose. And so we decided, well, we would shut them down, and that probably was a good idea. And then if you read some of the literature from the time, the thought was, well, we'll move these individuals back into the community, and then we will treat them in the community. We'll set up a set of community mental health centers, federally run community mental health centers, which was a great idea. They just never funded them, and they never set any of them up. But they did shut down the hospitals, and so everybody had to go somewhere. So they went to jail, and they went onto the streets, and then they went to live with their families. And that's where we are today. And it's a disturbing situation because in the United States today, a majority of people with serious mental illness receive no treatment. And again, I say that, and I have said that so many times in presentations that I've made all over the country, and I don't think people really fully appreciate what I'm saying. Because, I'm not saying that we have a problem and we're working it through and we're struggling. I'm literally saying that we have a completely dysfunctional, it doesn't even work, even the way it's set up. A majority of the people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression receive no treatment. And so, if that was cancer, the only difference would be we'd have dead bodies laying everywhere. And with our mental illness, we never equate the suicides that occur. We never really fully appreciate that you do die from mental illness. And so, it's pretty disturbing to imagine that a supposed system exists and that a majority of the constituents that system is supposed to care for literally receive no treatment, that it's not able to help them. And that goes across, obviously, all ethnicities. You can see there's some variability. Asian Americans are the worst and Caucasians are the best. But even if you look at those that, this percentage here, obviously we're saying, some 60% or so are getting treated. If you look at that 60%, even the National Institutes of Health will tell you that the estimates suggest that only 15% of the individuals that are actually treated, this group over here, that only 15% of them even receive the minimally adequate treatment for their illness. So what happens is that a subset, about 25%, they receive some treatment, but it's not minimally adequate. So they might get some medication, but not enough medication for what they need, or they might have gone to therapy, but not enough therapy to alleviate their symptoms. And so only about 15% of individuals are receiving the minimally adequate treatment. So again, imagine that in the context of any other chronic condition like diabetes or heart disease. If only 15% of the people with diabetes ever received the minimally adequate treatment, you'd have people all over the place losing feet and going blind and dying. It would be horrible. But with mental illness, we never have this conversation. We argue and talk about things that are really kind of meaningless in the context of this because our criminal justice system's been overwhelmed. It's affecting our educational system. It's affecting our economy. We spend billions of dollars every year on trying to deal with the effects of this. So if you look at children, for instance, they're even worse off because Yeah, up to the age of 18, it's estimated that children almost 50% of children will experience some type of mental health problem, whereas about 22% of those will have a severe impairment. But of that, only 7% of children will ever receive any treatment, ever have a mental health actual treatment office visit for that. I mean, that's just unbelievable to even imagine. I mean, think about how often children go for ear infections, but only 7% of all the children that have a mental health problem, even those that are very seriously impairing, would ever receive an office visit. No, teachers are almost completely untrained to deal with mental health problems. They're supposed to be there. Oh, that is done from epidemiology studies by the government. They go out and take random samples of the population. Yeah, so that's government data there. So is this other stuff here. All this is the CDC do huge epidemiology studies of the population every few years to determine what percentage of the population shows certain diseases or disorders, and then they also check to see how many of those individuals actually get care, where do they get care. All that data is available on the websites. So some do the diagnosis, yes. And some of the epidemiology studies, the epidemiologist actually does the diagnosis. And then in some of the studies, it's whether you were diagnosed with one. So they're looking for people that were diagnosed. So it varies. Now, what are some of the barriers? You might ask, well, why are these people not getting care? Do they just not go get care? Do they, what happens? And really it's kind of what I call the 3 A's: accessibility, affordability, and acceptability. Accessibility, some people literally don't have transportation to get to care. There are very few facilities, and there are far too few mental health care providers. If you call a mental health care provider today and you're a new patient, it can be weeks to months before you can get in. I mean, sometimes the wait is really verging on the ridiculous. I mean, it can be months before you can get in as a new client. And most people, unfortunately, engage the mental health care system when they're in crisis. They don't recognize that the problem's coming and then go get help. They're in crisis, and now they're telling you it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks before you can get in. Affordability, the limited resources, no insurance or mental health coverage. I mean, even if you have resources, so for instance, you have insurance often pays very, very little. A lot of the people we see here at the center have insurance, but they've been unable to engage care just because the time frame, it's too long, they need to see somebody, or their insurance pays so little that it just really doesn't really mean anything. We do have a parity law that was signed into effect. It had virtually no effect, no change at all. Mental health and physical health illnesses are supposed to be treated the same by insurance companies. I have seen no change at all since the law was signed into effect. And then acceptability. A lot of people will tell you, I don't want to go talk to anybody because I'm afraid people are going to know that I'm ill. I don't want people to think I'm crazy. Then they'll label me and they'll treat me differently. Or they may just, within the particular cultural view, like for instance, Asian Americans are the least likely to access care, and it's an honor-based culture. And, there's a shame brought on the family when an individual connects with a mental health care provider. So they don't want that shame to be brought onto the family. So all of these have to be overcome in some sense to be able to adequately get care to one another. I would say, this is probably the one that is probably easiest to overcome. Believe it or not, I think this is harder to overcome, building facilities and things like that. And I don't know that necessarily is the answer. I think affordability, we're going to talk about some of this in a minute, is the easiest to overcome. I think obviously education will take care of a lot of this. I mean, and education, it can be done in a very straightforward manner. I mean, I have a son in the 6th grade now, but I remember when I was going through his 5th grade science book with him, they're doing like life sciences, and there's a chapter there's a discussion of all types of systems of the body, in their science book. but virtually no discussion of the brain. There's discussions of cancer and diabetes and dysfunctions of different organs, but no mention of mental health problems. What if every fifth grade child in the United States had a component on mental illness and the brain in the fifth grade? By the time they become an adult, a mental illness would just be looked at as a normal illness, right? It was just something you learned about. Whereas now they just don't really learn about it. So there's a lot of things we can do, I think, to overcome some of these things on the education side. But some of these other issues are a little bit more difficult. So what does a system, quote unquote, look like now? It's really a disjointed set of resources. It's not really a system. If you think about a system, you think about an entry point and then movement in a particular direction, perhaps. And so, right now, most mentally ill individuals live with their family. And so it's the family that tends to engage resources in the system. But, we have professional mental health care providers out there. We have acute psychiatric hospitalization. And that's another thing that most people don't understand is that virtually all hospitalization for psychiatry is acute care, which means that it's crisis care. If you're in crisis, if you're suicidal, or you've become delusional to the point you can't care for yourself, you can be placed in a psychiatric facility. And the average stay in the U.S. is 8 days. That's how long. And so, they're going to give you medication to stabilize you, and then they're going to release you as quickly as they can because it's an acute care facility. It's not like if you went there because you had you have pancreatitis and they're going to treat that. And when you went in, you had it. And when you come out, you don't have it anymore. This is just stabilization. And so, that's what this is for. And then we have some supportive services. You certainly hear about support groups and things like that. And we have some community residential services. So, for instance, here in the U.S., here in Houston, there's a great place called the Mental Health Co-op, which is it's a house kind of down in the Montrose area, and I think about 14 mentally ill individuals live there. They have a program for them, and they can live there for their whole lives. But they have a program. They're cared for. They're taught skills and really life skills, things like that. So it's a great program, but those almost don't exist. I mean, they're just really, and they're very expensive. They tend to be. But there's also places like the Gathering place. There's also St. Joseph's House, which are clubhouses for people with mental illness, kind of day programs where they can go. But again, those in all of Houston, there's 2 of those, for everyone that's mentally ill in Houston. And so some of these exist, but they're very disconnected. And the way the system works now is usually you engage it in crisis and you try to see a mental health care provider, or you engage at this end where you're hospitalized and then you're put back on. And really, this is the system, back and forth and back and forth. There's no clear entry point. It's difficult to access. As you've seen from the data, the majority of people don't access it. There's no true continuum. These things are disconnected. Oftentimes, it's said of our mental health care system that the best outcome is stability. And think about that. If you were mentally ill, would you want someone to say, "Well, we're shooting for stability"? That sounds horrible. I mean, I would want to shoot for recovery. I would want to shoot for a quality of life that is gives me joy and fulfillment. But those things are never discussed in the context. This is very costly because the readmission rates are unbelievable for people with serious mental illness. Within a span of even 30-day, readmission rates can just be through the roof. So it's really pretty. Usually what you get with a person, say, has bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, particularly the psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, you'll have several months of stability and then a crash, and you're hospitalized. Months of stability, crash, hospitalized. And this is just a cycle that will continue year after year after year with no hope of breaking it. A very limited family involvement, particularly since HIPAA was put into place in '96. Families have been almost completely pushed out because we are very concerned about our own personal autonomy and privacy. HIPAA was put in place mostly for cancer and AIDS, so your employer wouldn't find out that you had those, and then they would take your insurance away from you or whatever. But nobody ever thought about how that affected mental health. And the way it affects mental health is like this. You can be fully delusional. I mean, you literally could tell me that you were Jesus and then also tell me, but I don't want to be treated. And then you get to not be treated. And there's nothing your family can do about it. You can be delusional and your mother drives you, 30-year-old individual who's delusional, and your mother drives you to the psychiatrist to get for a follow-up, and you say, I don't want you to go in the back with me, Mom. And then the doctor doesn't let her come in the back. And then when you come out and your mother asks you, well, what did the doctor say? I don't want to tell you. And the mother turns to the doctor and says, well, what did you tell her? I can't tell you. They're an adult. They didn't sign a release of information for her. Well, did you change their medicine? I can't tell you. And so, again, I think you have to understand the context there. I'm not just talking about someone gets to make their own decisions. I'm talking about someone that everyone would agree is completely delusional and has no grip on reality. That person gets to make their own decisions. And so families have been pushed almost completely out. That's why here, unfortunately, a lot of times we are helping families connect with lawyers to be able to get guardianships over their adult children, because without that, there is no care for the child will be, the adult child become homeless. So it can be pretty disturbing. And then very high rates of repeat hospitalization. So this is kind of a mess, and it's really worse than I'm describing it, to tell you the truth. Every day we work with families here that are trying to get to care. Simple things like the number of psychiatric hospitals that will discharge someone and not give them a referral. That would seem like an obvious, right? If you were discharged, you would think that they would want you to continue your care, but very few of the psychiatric hospitals provide any kind of outpatient care, so when they discharge you, they're done. They don't have anything for you to do, so there's no referral to give you. So it's just a really, the fact that I only know of one hospital in the community, one psychiatric hospital in the community that will allow if you previously were being seen by a mental health care provider in the community, and then you had a crisis and you have to be hospitalized. I only know of one hospital in the community that will allow your mental health care provider from the community to actually come see you while you're in the hospital. They start all over. They start all over with new meds and everything, and then you get kind of. So it's not like it's not like cancer. It's not like MD Anderson where everybody goes, oh, it's just unbelievable, and you can come from Waco with your records and they fix everything up for you. And you go back to Waco and your oncologist there has this incredible thing to do now that they've laid out. It's just not like that. And it should be. It really should be. So how is this all connected back to the whole Geel thing? Well, this is, one of the connections there. Geel is a great story, as I said, of where faith and community come together to overcome an impossible problem. But in our modern era, what we find is that individuals in psychological distress, these people struggling with these mental health problems, they are more likely to go to a clergy than they are a mental health care provider or a physician first. And that goes for anyone in the general population. This is, again, something that was found in some of those large epidemiology studies. When people are struggling, they will engage a faith community, a clergy member. Now, they tend to not know that they have a mental health care problem. They just know they're having a problem. But that gives us an opportunity. If we know where people are more likely to go first when they first start having one of these problems, then that should be the front door to the mental health care system. We should be able to move them on. And unfortunately, a very small number of pastors, 10% or less, ever make a mental health referral. They just don't recognize what's really sitting in front of them. And so that's something that we're going to talk about that we've looked at. But what in psychology and psychiatry, what we refer to that is, we refer to clergy as gatekeepers, that they are they're the gatekeeper. Police officers are gatekeepers, nurses are gatekeepers. You mentioned teachers. Teachers are thought to be gatekeepers. The problem with all of that is, and there's just enormous amounts of literature written on this model, where gatekeepers recognize that there's a problem, and then they refer those individuals to professional care. The problem is almost no training is given, or no training at all is given to clergy. I know that for a fact because I did a study of the 249 accredited seminaries in North America, and not one of them offers a course where mental illness is discussed. Teachers are not really trained to recognize mental health care problems, although their experience allows them to do some, but they don't have really overt training on that. Police officers are getting better today just because of the massive amounts of mental health calls that they have to make. The Harris County Sheriff's Department is a real model for the country. They have an incredible training program for the sheriff's deputies. And then, it's just a lot of these gatekeepers really were never given any clear training. And then even on top of that, when they're given training, oftentimes the training is to help them recognize the problem, but nothing on what they're supposed to do with the person once they So I'm a teacher, and I recognize that the child might have a mental health care problem. I have a few options. I can talk to the school counselor. I can talk to the parent. But again, I'm limited in what I can. I'm so removed from getting the child to care that sometimes it's very difficult. Same thing with a clergy. I teach a clergy how to recognize a mental health care problem. Unless he or she has connections with mental health care providers in the community, the person that's in distress is the last person that should be in charge of trying to get to care. Someone has to help them get to care. And so that's been another one of the problems. So now, churches already are involved in mental health care. They just don't know it. Churches often have prison ministries or jail ministries, and I've already told you that 64% of jail inmates have a mental health problem. That's, way higher than general population, which is like 7%. Homeless, about 30% of the homeless, as I said. Addicts. Today, you're looking at around 43, kind of mid 40% of people with addictions also have an underlying mental health care problem. When I was in graduate school, that was probably in the 20s. It's gone. I mean, the dynamic or the context around substance use has changed so dramatically over the last 10 to 20 years. It's really just unreal. Yeah, opioids have really really changed the face of that, and kind of designer, kind of cheap drugs like Kush and things like that. Opioid, again, this is an unbelievable statistic. Opioid overdose is the leading cause of death for adults 50 and younger in the United States. That's just an unreal, it's more than accidents. There's almost never been anything more than accidents. But if you're 50 and younger, that's the leading cause of death in the U.S. now. So yeah, that's a real problem. I think you're going to, obviously they've tightened up a lot on the prescriptions now for that, but at this point there's so much of it out there, it's just hard to imagine. Right. Well, I was just yesterday I was looking at one of our clients who had, she had typed out all her meds for one of the clinicians, and we were going through some of her medication, and she's on a bunch of antipsychotics and stuff like that. But, here's a doctor that gave her an opioid for her neck. Here's another doctor that had given her opioid for her knee. And, I'm like, does this doctor know about that doctor know about that doctor? None of them know about each other. So it's just pharmacy. And so it can be real. I love medication. Medication's tremendous. It can be very effective, miraculous. It just has to be done correctly. And then, human trafficking, which is a very hot topic in faith communities now. Over 70% of those women are found to have significant and long-term post-traumatic stress issues as a result of their trauma. And then natural disasters. The primary responder for relief in relation to natural disasters like tsunamis and earthquakes are Christian organizations, and up to 35% of a population after a natural disaster can show long-term post-traumatic stress issues. So, in a sense, churches, congregations, fellowships, they're already involved in mental health care. It's just that most of the time they don't recognize that. They're working with these populations that are extremely high in mental health problems. Plus, we know people are more likely to go to them first when they have mental health problems, but you find very, very few that have really ever given any thought to that or recognized that or have training in that. So what are we looking to do here at the Hope and Healing Center? Well, one of the things that we need is a continuum of care. We don't have that in mental health care. And when I say a continuum of care, what I mean is a process in which there's an entry, there's a wide entry, so it picks up as many people as possible in one end, and everybody knows how you connect to the system. And then as people move through the system, fewer and fewer people keep moving. People are, if you begin to receive treatment or care, and then some people don't need any more, that's enough. And then fewer and fewer, till ultimately only a very small amount of those are ever going to make it to hospitalization. So what are we doing? So as we know, most people are living with their family or cared for by a family member. So we also know that people are more likely to go to a faith community or connect with a clergy as an entry point. So we've started with faith communities, and I'm going to talk to you about that. So we have a program where we equip faith communities to be a real front door to the mental health care system, and I'll talk about that in a minute. School systems will be the next one that we focus, and then large businesses. But we've begun with faith communities, and our goal is to have hundreds of faith communities across the Houston area over the next 5 years. And then we have to connect these together, not that disjointed mess I showed you a minute ago. So supportive services. Affordability is a tremendous problem here. And so, if it's expensive to go see a psychiatrist. If you have no insurance, you have to pay cash. But are there services that can be offered by people that have kind of a minimal level of training that might be low cost or no cost? Well, of course, we know that, and they're called support groups and peer-delivered services. We've been doing it for years, just kind of on the side here and there, and the research, which I'll show you in a second, shows it's tremendously effective. I mean, if you know nothing more than AA is tremendously effective for people that are addicted. It's free. It's led by people that have a shared life experience. And so we need to put those in place. And what we need to do is we need to put those in place where people go first. So these supportive services, say peer counselors or coaches, support groups, they need to be at the places that people connect with the system. So if I walk in to a congregation and a pastor recognizes that I have a mental health care problem, he or she can say, hey, I want to make a referral for you to some professional care that I'll talk about in a second. But hey, we also have a support group here that'd be great for you. It'd be really helpful. And you can connect with that Thursday night. It costs nothing. Just show up. And so now, and these can be tremendously therapeutic. Or we have somebody here at the congregation who's a peer counselor, and she can see you once a week for the next 6 weeks for no cost. It's just part of what we do here at the church. And so we have begun setting these up once these are trained. And then we already have our professional care out there. So the hope is we have a large net here. People come in, they make contact, they're recognized. They're moved into supportive services along with their families. Their families are getting care too. Some are referred on to professional care, and those individuals receive the professional care they need, be that psychology or therapy, psychiatry, and then set up day programs, places where people might be able to stay, like the mental health co-op. Somebody might be able to stay 3 or 4 months. Instead of going into acute hospitalization, they might be able to be in more of a residential situation. And so if we can do this, so right now we are working on these 2 parts of our continuum for the city. And this is a citywide project that we're involved in. We're working in collaboration with some of the larger hospitals too. Memorial Hermann crisis clinics are involved with us, as Methodist Hospital, which is one of our major collaborators, in trying to develop a continuum of care. I want very few people here. I want lots of people down here. And then it varies in the middle. But what you have is a clear point of entry. It's easily accessible. It promotes independence in the individual. It doesn't just say, hey, you're mentally ill, the best you're ever going to get stability. And what stability means is that you're not a problem. That's what that means. It doesn't mean that you ever go out and enjoy your life. It means that you're very quiet and you don't cause a problem. So it promotes independence. We have a program here that we use with all of our clients called Thrive, and it teaches them skills and tools so that they can become more independent and manage their illness. And we'll work with people that are the sickest of the sick, schizophrenics, bipolar, with delusions. I mean, we work with people that are very ill, that other people have given up on, and we're having tremendous success. promotes long-term support, no or low cost. All of this on the front end is no cost. And then the rest, then you have more resources to worry about this. Integrates the family into care because when an individual connects here, family are also put into these support groups. And then hopefully we see a reduction here. So what we're doing now is we develop this continuum. We've begun working on this. We're in talks right now for the development of recovery homes. We're working with Methodist and Memorial Hermann, which are involved in acute psychiatric hospitalization and professional care. And so the goal over the next 5 years is to be able to develop a continuum of care here in Houston that we then can begin to monitor and see if we can show a measurable increase in access and a reduction in hospitalization. And so that's the goal right now. And what we're doing, and the way we're doing that is with faith communities, school districts, peer-delivered services, and then kind of cutting edge kind of ways to think about, integrating people into the community as opposed to putting them into an institution. So now, what the data shows us is that individuals who work with peers, peer counselors, mental health coaches, things like that, support groups, that causes them to, it reduces their hospitalization or days spent inpatient, and all of these things have been demonstrated with enormous number of empirical studies, even our own studies with the support group material that we've developed and that we are putting into these faith communities. We find, this is for our Living Grace group, which is for individuals who have serious mental illness. We see a significant reduction in depression and anxiety symptoms. We see a significant increase in individuals' spiritual growth. This, again, is all peer-led. And these are people with serious mental illness. When I first started putting these together, probably 10 years ago, when I very first started developing these, before we started doing all the work on them, I was told, well, you can't mix diagnoses together. You can't have people that lack insight in support groups. This will never work. Well, I mean, this is in over 100 churches, 17 states around the country, seven different countries. This is our trauma group. This is data actually that we used with peers in Libya during the revolution. So we had significant reductions in PTSD, clinical symptoms, PTSD checklist score reduction. But again, led by people with no more training than what we gave them prior to them beginning the group. There's a curriculum that they use, which is based on cognitive behavior therapy. So we have something very standard for them to use, but it's delivered by a peer. It doesn't require them to really use any resources at all. So this is what we're doing. This is our program. We will go into a faith community. We will offer an initial 4-hour training for the clergy and the staff, which we call Mental Health 101. That teaches the clergy and the staff, or whatever people within that congregation or a group they want us to train, what we call the 4 R's: how to recognize a mental health care problem, how to make a proper referral. And then what we have done is we have clinicians here that are continually vetting individuals in the community, providers. So we've already vetted a large network of providers across the community. So you don't have to go find people to refer to. We've already found them. We know what insurances they take. We know which people work on a sliding scale. We know which people do pro bono work. We know all of that kind of work ahead of time. So we have that database that we've developed, and you can work within that. And so how to recognize, refer, how to relate to somebody in distress, and then how to set up restorative programs within your faith community that will offer some therapeutic aspect to these people. And that would be our support groups or support groups from anyone. We'll hook you up with National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, or what used to be DBSA, which is Remind now, or Fresh Hope, or whoever you want to come in and have a support group, or we can train your people to run support groups. You also have access to our clinicians here that can help you with referrals or answer questions, or you can always refer here. We offer 40 support groups a week, as well as individual services for people that have serious mental illness. We also do a lot of mental health care planning. All of our services are free. So people come. Last year we served individuals from 191 different zip codes. And so, we see very ill people from all over the community that are referred here. We also will take somebody from your congregation and train them to be a mental health coach. We have a training next week, and we think we have individuals from 8 different churches that'll be there. And we'll train them. They'll know how to do the support groups. They'll know how to work through the curriculum. They'll know how to oversee a mental health oriented ministry at the church that offers services. And so that person will go back and be the point person at that church. That person will also be our point person there to provide data for us to show that this is being effective. And then finally, we have a website called the Mental Health Gateway, which is an online platform that has basically a drop-down menu. It has lots of different mental illnesses, and you click on a mental illness, and there's a video there that has a mental health care provider, a clergy that's worked with someone with that problem, and someone who's been impacted by that mental health care problem. They talk about, it from a scientific perspective, from a kind of experiential aspect, and also how a faith community could help that person. And then there's information that you can read about that. There's a set of databases where you can put your zip code in, and it'll show you, say, all the mental health facilities in the area around that zip code, or it'll show you all the providers that are near that area. And then there's some downloadable resources. And we have on that website right now, you also can contact our mental health coaches through there. We have, I always forget one, so let's see if I can remember them now. Depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, OCD, eating disorders, substance abuse, borderline personality disorder. We're filming dementia right now and ADHD. I forgot. Is that all of them? Okay, I thought I forgot one. So that's all of them right now. Our hope is to add 3 modules every year. So that amount that I just mentioned there covers the majority of what you run into. But all that information is there and available, and it's set up specifically to support the faith communities once they've been trained and brought online. So this is our first set of front doors. And then as we finish out a large mass of churches, we'll be moving into our school systems. We've already had a couple of school systems contact us. They're very interested in having us, they've heard about what we're doing in the faith communities, and they want us to come train their administrators and teachers. And in essence, this program is set up for them also. And so we even have some teen versions of the support groups that are being piloted that we should be able to offer by the time. And I know Remind already has a teen version. So there are teen versions of those. So again, it's all about setting up a continuum of care. And most of what I talked about so far has been no cost or low cost to the individual who's trying to access care. One of the primary things people will tell you about fixing the mental health care system is, well, we don't have enough mental health care providers. Well, we don't. We're never going to have enough. You're just not going to convince enough people to go to school for as long as I went to school and get paid what you get paid for being a mental health care provider. Insurance doesn't pay anything. Memorial Hermann, I'm at one of the former CEOs. I'm having lunch with one of the former CEOs, and I said, why does Memorial Hermann have no psychiatric beds? And he said, because there's no money in psychiatry. That's just how it is. It's not that he wants to make money. He wants to just break even, and you can't even break even because there's just no money in it. And then Menninger, for instance, which is a wonderful psychiatric hospital here, they don't take insurance. And the reason they'll tell you they don't take insurance is because they know that someone with a psychiatric condition that needs to be hospitalized needs to be treated for more than 8 days. And so they want to treat you for 3 to 4 months so that they can really help you begin to move forward. But if they took insurance, they could only treat you for an average of 8 days. So, I won't even tell you how much it is to go to Menninger for a month. It's in the tens of thousands of thousands of dollars. But that's not their fault. They're just trying. They have to make money to be able to do what they do, and they want to treat people the way they should be treated. And that is how people should be treated. You should be able to stay for 3 to 4 months. When you're in a crisis like that, not dumped back on your family after a very short period of time where you're boosted full of meds. And then this is what this kind of looks like for us right now. And all the zip codes that you see a little red dot, and even that one way out there was kind of a weird church way out in Prairie View contacted us and had us come out there. But we are working with congregations in all of these zip codes right now, training them and getting their support groups set up and getting their mental health coaches trained. Some of them already have their support groups set up, but over time, Our expectation is that, you'll be able to zoom in on any one of these zip codes and you'll have 5, 6 churches in every zip code that will have been trained. You don't have to train every church, and every church doesn't have to do everything. It's not about that. What it is, it's about every faith community doing something. So if you do nothing more than let us come out and do the training. Now, see, here's the best part. And I got an email this morning from a pastor that I just did a training right down here just last Thursday. He said, "This has been the most incredible thing. I cannot believe you guys come out to the churches and do this for free. It's all free. We do it for free. And so we'll come to you and we'll do it for free." He says, I've never had the response from my staff that I have seen after they had this training. And so, it's what they deal with every day, but no one ever kind of helped them understand that that's what they deal with every day. And so it's going very well. Hopefully, as I said, at the same time we're developing a broad network of faith communities that are front doors. We will also continue to develop our network of providers. So ultimately the goal is one day if you're over here in zip code 77063 right there, and you call the Hope and Healing Center, which is right around in there somewhere, and you say, "That's where I am," we will be able, you don't have to come here to get your service. We'll be able to say, okay, well, there are 3 faith communities near you that we have mental health coaches at and support groups. You can go to any of those. And we also have a set of providers already vetted in that area. You'll be able to get all your mental health care right there in that area. And so right in your neighborhood will be everything that you need. And then at least half of it will be for no cost. And so that's the goal. Now that's going to take time. The goal right now is 5 years to get the faith communities all online, and maybe out to another 8 years to get some of the recovery homes online. But we have all the time in the world, I guess. So it's really bad right now. So that's what we're doing. I will be happy to answer any questions you might have around that.